Welcome to another episode of NBA 2K20 roster edits. Today we're going to be talking about the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat aren't a franchise that have been along in existence that long. However, they've been pretty successful in their short existence and time frame they've been around. So let me just jump right into this. Who else? Small forward, LeBron James. Followed up with shooting guard Dwyane Wade. Alonzo Mourning, Zoe himself at center. Tim Hardaway, point guard. Shaquille O'Neal, a 33-year-old Shaquille O'Neal, mind you, so a mature Shaquille O'Neal. At another center position, Chris Bosh, power forward center, part of the big three. Small forward Glen Rice, who's a very good player for a long time. Shooting guard Eddie Jones, who was also very successful with his Heat days. Rony Seikaly, the spin doctor himself, who was one of the original Heat, if I'm not mistaken, along with Glen Rice. Rice wasn't one of the original, but Rony Seikaly was their big pick. I do remember that. Goran Dragic, who had a very successful career over the last few years with Miami since coming over from Phoenix. Center P.J. Brown, who also played some power forward as well. Shooting guard, small forward Steve Smith, who started out with the Heat. Udonis Haslem, who this guy is, I don't know how this guy keeps going. Spent his entire career with the Heat. I'm just going to pull his numbers up here. Started in 2003-04 with the Heat, and I don't even know if he was still going this year. He might have still been, I'm not too sure. Hassan Whiteside, who was a very strong defensive player, who came with the Heat, who moved on after this year. Thunder Dan Majerle, who came to the Heat as a free agent later in his career. So I'm just going to jump right into this and say this is a pretty short roster edit because I only have one recommendation to remove, and that's not really a recommendation because this guy's a good player as well. However, we fall into the category of, let's just count this really fast. One center, two centers, three centers, Rony Seikaly, four centers, Shaquille O'Neal, five centers, Alonzo Mourning. So realistically, you can't have a team with five centers. That's just way too many. Now, one of the things I could recommend is you take P.J. Brown and make him a power forward. However, I chose to swap P.J. Brown out with another player who had been on the all-time Heat roster in previous games. However, this year he was omitted from it for whatever reason, and I just simply swapped P.J. Brown out with him. So let me tell you who that is after we go through the starting lineups. All right, so our starting lineups are pretty simple. Starting lineup, point guard Tim Hardaway, no shock there. Dwyane Wade at the two guard, the shooting guard. LeBron James at small forward. I don't think there's much argument with that. Chris Bosh, part of the big three, at your starting power forward. Alonzo Mourning at your starting center. Now, I think the stock roster has Shaquille O'Neal in the starting lineup. However, not that Shaq is a bad player, but he's not a power forward. I mean, that's having Mourning and O'Neal in the same lineup is kind of having like two of the same players. So I feel Bosh is a better outside perimeter player. He's not a big-time inside scorer, but he can, shoot a three. He can, shoot from the outside. Whereas if you have Mourning and O'Neal, you're looking at totally just an inside game. So Shaq was a great player, brought the Heat their first championship, but I simply slot him as the backup center. So the backup small forward, longtime Heat great Glen Rice. Obviously, he backs up LeBron James, so not much to discuss there. Eddie Jones is your backup shooting guard behind Dwyane Wade. Again, a great player for many years with the Heat. Started out his career with the Lakers, however, also played for the Hornets, but came to the Heat after the Hornets and had some very successful seasons. Now, this is the guy that I swap out with P.J. Brown, and that is Brian Grant. Now, Brian Grant and P.J. Brown are very similar type players. That doesn't have his Heat numbers on there, but after Grant left, I want to say Portland, he moved to Miami, and he was a very good player for about 3 to 4 seasons with the Heat. So him and P.J. Brown are similar type players. They both could average, about 10, 12 points a game, also get about 10 or 12 rebounds a game. So I felt being Brian Grant is a true power forward. I felt adding him to this lineup over P.J. Brown was probably the most formidable thing to do. You may disagree with me on that, however. The backup point guard, Goran Dragic, he is a great player. I think when it's all said and done, you're going to look at his numbers and say, wow, this guy is actually a pretty darn good player overall through his entire career. But a great player for the Heat, a great player for the Suns, so a great backup point guard. This brings us to another big guy, Rony Seikaly, the spin doctor. Now, you could put Seikaly. I recommend that maybe you also add his second position as power forward, because he can come in and play the power forward position just like Grant. When you have Alonzo on the floor or you have Shaq on the floor, you can bring Seikaly in to play your forward position as well, to be a good defender and also a very good post player. That brings us to Steve Smith. Steve Smith was a good shooting guard, small forward. Started his career with the Heat, moved on to the Hawks. Had some very successful seasons for a long time. Great backup off the bench. That rounds out the roster with another big man, Hassan Whiteside. I didn't allocate any minutes for Hassan. He is I don't want to say he's poor on the offensive side of the ball, but out of the centers on this team, he is the least likely to be an offensive threat. However, he is probably the most likely to be the best defensive threat on this team, meaning he can block shots, he can pull down 20 rebounds in a game on a given night. That's how good this guy is. So if you want to really play some defense, bring Hassan Whiteside in. You're just not going to expect a lot of offense out of him. And I want to say I played a game with the Heat, and he is a horrendous free throw shooter on this game. I don't know if that reflects real life, but on this game, the guy has no respect as a free throw shooter. So those are just my top 13. Now I round out the roster. I just left these guys on there, Udonis Haslem and Dan Majerle. These are both the reserve guys on the stock roster, so I just left them there. I almost put Mario Chalmers over Majerle, but decided not to, because just to have another point guard or Gary Payton, but I decided to leave Thunder Dan on there instead. So the team, who else? Erik Spoelstra, the guy that brought them their championships. So this team is pretty easy, pretty short and sweet. I just recommend swapping out P.J. Brown with Brian Grant, and that's all I got for you. So hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. Thanks.